Hi everybody, and thank you Adrian. It's great to have an opportunity to talk with you all today, some of the great thinkers in housing, and having all these great minds at work on this area. I often ponder why we still have a broken housing system, and I come to the conclusion that a lot of that's got to do with politics. And I don't know how many of you noticed a very slight slip of the tongue by Minister Tim when he said policies that undermine homelessness. So anyway, I'm from Shelter SA. I've been asked to talk today about community engagement in urban renewal and stock transfer, with a focus on public housing tenants as particularly important and vulnerable stakeholders. So when we want to engage communities, how do we find them? Can we look them up in the white pages? Look them up on Facebook? It's not that easy. So to be able to engage a community, we need to understand exactly what a community is and what engagement means. So I'll talk briefly about how community is used in social policy, what theory tells us, and how people talk about where they live, with an example from Adelaide about the redevelopment of public housing from a tenant perspective. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So just how is the term community used in social policy and by governments and ministers? Here's an example. Early in 2012, our South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill announced the formation of the Urban Renewal Authority. It's now known as Renewal SA, and I am no longer on the board. He said that to its success will be a close relationship with the community, and that local communities will be closely involved and consulted. Again, we heard Minister Tim saying that of the people who moved from underutilised properties, that they found themselves living in a community, just like that, like magic. We hear the term community repeatedly mentioned in social policy, building communities, strengthening communities, community engagement and community partnerships. But what does it really mean? In social policy, there's an emphasis on positive meanings of community, that they're collectives where we can all find mutual support and have shared values. But what we know in reality is that there's a lot of anonymity, a very individualistic society, and competition for scarce resources like housing. So theory tells us that there isn't one tangible community out there that we can touch or talk to, but there are many different types of communities, including communities of interest, people who share different methods of communication, like virtual communities and online communities, Facebook, social networks, so communities amongst people who work together or study together, and there's different religious and cultural communities. Theorists note that there's a difference between the society we live in and community. Whilst society contains transient, impersonal and one-dimensional relationships, communities are those that contain much more personal relationships, multifaceted relationships, and basically relate to ideas around feeling safe, playing a valued role in those groups, and a sense of togetherness. But when people talk about where they live, they always talk about their street, their suburb or their neighbourhood. Even when they're asked leading questions about their community, they never actually use that word. They talk about having friends and family living nearby, feeling familiar with their surroundings and feeling safe. So what we see is that theory and practice are very well aligned with this focus on relationships as being right at the heart of meanings of community. Often that seems to be ignored in social policy. So for policy to be effective, it needs to define communities much more accurately. And I put it to you today that governments, housing providers, or peak bodies can't create those relationships and therefore can't create communities or strengthen them, but can we engage them? When we're doing stock transfer and redevelopment, I think we're much better off identifying people who've got a stake in what we're doing, an interest in what we're doing, and focus on people and the places where they live. So this diagram shows us that the way engagement occurs is on a continuum. And we often hear governments claim that they have engaged communities, but when we look more closely, we can see that they've simply written them a letter or held a public meeting. And using this model, we can see that these activities are a very long way from the other end of the engagement spectrum, where empowerment happens and there are opportunities for dialogue and shared decision making. At the continuum, in the continuum of engagement, it's interesting to think about where power's positioned, and that's going to be relevant to the example of public housing tenants coming up. So people who are only on the receiving end of information have no power or influence over what's happening to them, and this adds to their feelings of powerlessness. If we remain stuck in the telling stages, people won't understand or remember. It's a bit like going to the doctor and being told you've got cancer. After that, you don't hear anything else that the doctor tells you because you're in shock. And it's the same as being told that your home's going to be demolished or that you have to move. So in Adelaide, the state government first wrote to over 160 public housing tenants living at 3 inner city sites to let them know that their homes would be redeveloped back in 2011. There have also been a couple of public meetings. The information they've been given is very uncertain, and public meetings are notoriously bad for engaging people, especially when those people are very vulnerable. So this example is also stuck in the information provision stage, combined with the length of time since people have known and the waiting, the time that they've lived with an uncertain future, and these poor engagement activities have created great stress for the tenants. And I guess that's one of the take-home messages today. So I want to read a couple of tenant quotes to you that illustrate how deeply they've been affected by what's going on with their kind permission. So this brings me back to the main topic of urban renewal and the duress that it causes. I am quite frankly sick over this. The letter that was put in our box in December of 2011, stating the possibility that our homes will be demolished. I will not use any euphemisms here. Whoever made the decision to post the letters at Christmas is heartless, ignorant, and should not have the position that they are in. Honestly, I feel like vomiting recounting this and the chaos that it has caused in our lives. I believe that also it was done deliberately at that specific time because to try to phone them, since everyone was going off on holidays, would be fruitless. And another one. Tonight I'm reminded of the Broadway musical Rent. It chronicles the lives of the disadvantaged and the sick, amidst their plight to maintain their beloved homes against a landlord that thinks more of money than of humanity. If those are the minutes that comprise a year, just how many of those dear moments have I wasted since that heartless letter? According to the song, time can be counted in daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter, in strife. For me, strife has prevailed. I have spent, by rough estimate, over 70,000 minutes of my life pondering our future, should we be forced to leave our home, and when that horrendous day might come. Certainly, I do not measure time by each Christmas that passes anymore. That letter sullied those. There is no peace in them, which is what defines Christmas by nature for most. I didn't smile when we put up our tree that year, and I do not know when or if I will again. In fact, every birthday, every milestone, they are nothing anymore if not depressing. I question when might each of them be the last, and who will decide our fate? Will it be a developer who chooses to dismiss our very existence as a financial investment? How do you measure a life in 15 months? The musical ended on a positive note, but will it be the same in our situation? I am very tired, and for now, peace is as elusive as hope. I wish there was something else I could count other than time until their next piece of mail. So the next quote comes from a tenant email that was sent to me as an explanation for not attending one of the public meetings. The reason that I couldn't leave her to go alone today is because there's always some element of potential self-harm. I'm not sure what people think bipolar disorder is, but I've seen her pound her head and cut her wrists over this many times. All of this has been excessive for me to live with. I can barely cope myself. I don't blame her, though, at all. I blame the way in which it was handled from the very beginning. I look at her and feel horrible, but what can I do? One of the tenants who was there today is an example of someone that wishes to die. She was the one that was hospitalised after the initial letter. I don't know if she mentioned that today or not. I doubt it, but it's true. Somewhere in all of this, Alice, I lost myself. Truthfully, I don't even care anymore, but I'll always fight for her. So these terribly sad feelings that are put forward have been a result of poor engagement processes. And what we're seeing here is the effect that staying at that beginning end of the continuum of engagement and the timing of providing information to tenants has caused great anxiety, depression and stress for these vulnerable people who, prior to Shelter SA getting involved, didn't have a voice at all. So these ideas about increased hospitalisations, increases in self-harm, visits to doctors and psychiatrists, and suicidal thoughts because of being so scared and worried. Research that's been done on chronic stress, looking at the effects of a nuclear disaster on people who live through it, shows that the threat of harm to them was invisible, unknown and uncertain. And I don't know if you can see similarities for these tenants about the faceless men who write to them and control their destiny, their unknown future and the uncertainty they live with. So I'll also let you know that the tenants at these sites actually have a great sense of belonging and attachment to where they live. They support each other in many ways and have some really close and long-standing personal relationships with their neighbours. So in fact, they do live in a community that has the potential to be destroyed if a redevelopment isn't conducted in a sensitive way. So Tim Mander, again, made a very tenuous link between philosophy and what he thought people should be doing if they live in homes that are too large for them. But for good quality stakeholder engagement to occur, there must be a philosophical commitment to empowering the stakeholders, but especially vulnerable tenants, to have local flexibility and autonomy, a consistent governance approach, and take a really long-term view. So how can we do engagement well? The principles and practices of community development are a tried and tested way of effectively and ethically engaging with stakeholders. And at Shelter SA, we've adapted some principles that guide work, and you're more than welcome to borrow, steal, customise them, copy them, and use them as a guide if they're helpful to you or your organisation. And I'll just leave you with these figures that are slightly out of date, but a reminder that while we're all busy talking about stock transfer and redevelopment, that once we had a public housing system that was for everybody and that really worked. So we need to keep reminding ourselves, as well as all the other taxpayers and voters out there, that to keep an eye on this valuable asset that belongs to all of us. And thank you.